Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. First story. I still get chills remembering that day. I've been a mailman for over 15 years in a quiet Texas town where everyone knows each other. My job was always calm and predictable until that Tuesday in March that changed everything. The heat was intense, the typical scorching Texas sun punishing without mercy. I was following my usual route, delivering mail and exchanging smiles with residents, as I always did. As I approached house 237 on Elm Street, something strange happened. A shiver ran down my spine, and an inexplicable feeling came over me. It was as if the air around that house was charged with mystery. I opened the mailbox with slightly trembling hands and was immediately hit by a peculiar aroma. It was a sweet smell, but at the same time intriguing and completely unfamiliar. It wasn't the first time I'd smelled this odor at that house. For weeks, I'd been noticing strange patterns in the correspondence sent to that address. The letters always came from the same sender, a place I'd never seen before, and arrived with unusual frequency, almost daily. In the digital age, this intrigued me deeply. Curiosity began to eat away at me, but I remembered the oath I took when joining the Postal Service. That day, while putting the letters in the box, I noticed one was heavier than normal. My fingers brushed the envelope, and I felt a strange texture as if there was something solid inside. For a brief moment, I was tempted to take a closer look, but quickly pushed that thought away. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I looked around, half paranoid, as if someone could read my thoughts. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I approached house 237, my heart raced. The strange smell persisted, sometimes stronger, sometimes barely noticeable. I started paying more attention to the residents, trying to spot anything unusual. It was a middle-aged couple, seemingly normal. The man always waved politely when he saw me. The woman rarely appeared. But there was something in his eyes, an unsettling gleam that made me uncomfortable. One afternoon, while delivering mail, I saw a strange movement through the living room window. Shadows moved quickly, as if they were hiding something. I felt my stomach churn. I was getting too involved in this, and a voice in the back of my mind warned me about the danger. It was on a Thursday that things started to get really scary. I was doing my usual route, approaching house 237 as always. Suddenly, I noticed a black car parked across the street. It wasn't a model I recognized from the neighborhood residents. When I passed by, I had the distinct feeling that someone was watching me from inside the vehicle. The windows were dark, but I swore I saw a reflection of a camera or binoculars. In the days that followed, I began to notice that same car at different points along my route, sometimes parked, other times passing slowly by me. Paranoia was taking over. Was I imagining things? Or was there really something sinister happening, something related to those mysterious letters? I started changing my routine, varying delivery times, taking different routes. But the feeling of being followed didn't leave me. One night, I woke up startled, swearing I'd heard the sound of a car parked in front of my house. I ran to the window, heart pounding, but the street was empty and quiet. That night, I couldn't sleep anymore, my mind going over every detail, every letter delivered, every suspicious look I'd noticed in recent weeks. On a Saturday morning, I decided I needed to do something. I couldn't live with that anxiety anymore, that constant fear. I decided to arrive at work early and take a look at the delivery records for house 237. I knew I was breaking the rules, but at this point, I didn't care anymore. With sweaty hands, I started rummaging through the files. That's when I discovered something that sent chills down my spine. The mysterious letters started arriving exactly 3 months after a local news story about a missing teenager in the neighboring town. Coincidence? Maybe. But my instinct screamed that there was a connection. That same day, while doing my route, I noticed something different about house 237. The living room curtain was slightly open, and I could see inside the house for the first time. What I saw left me paralyzed. The walls were covered with photos, maps, and newspaper clippings. It looked like the scene of a conspiracy movie. In the center of it all was an enlarged photo of a young man who looked familiar. It took me a few seconds to recognize. It was the missing teenager. My heart almost stopped. At that moment, I heard a noise coming from inside the house. In panic, I dropped the letters in the mailbox and got out of there as fast as I could. My mind was racing. What had I just discovered? And what should I do with this information? I spent the rest of the day in a state of nerves, barely able to concentrate on deliveries. The image of that room wouldn't leave my head. I knew I had to do something, but fear paralyzed me. What if I was wrong? What if it was all just a big coincidence? But what if it wasn't? I couldn't stop thinking about the missing boy and his family. When I got home that night, I made a decision. I was going to call the police anonymously. I picked up the phone several times, but always gave up at the last second. The next morning, I woke up determined to make the call. But when I got to work, I was called into my supervisor's office. My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. Had they discovered I'd been snooping through the records? To my surprise, he informed me that I would be transferred to another route. Apparently, there had been a complaint about my service in the Elm Street area. I tried to argue, saying I'd never received any complaints, but it was in vain. In the days following my transfer, I tried to convince myself that it was all just coincidences and an overactive imagination. My new route was quiet, with no mysteries or suspicious cars following me. But at night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about house 237 and that missing teenager. A week later, I was at the market when I saw the couple from the mysterious house. They didn't notice me, but I could observe them up close for the first time. They seemed normal, shopping like anyone else. The man was picking up cereal while the woman was choosing fruit. For a moment, I felt ridiculous for having suspected them. But then I noticed something. The woman was wearing a necklace with a strange pendant, similar to a symbol I had seen on one of the mysterious letters. That sight rekindled all my suspicions. It couldn't be just a coincidence. I left the market in a hurry, my heart pounding. I decided it was time to act. I couldn't carry that weight alone anymore. That night, I created an anonymous email and sent everything I knew to the local police and a city newspaper. I detailed the suspicious letters, the strange smell, the room with the clippings and maps, the connection to the missing teenager. After sending, I stayed up all night, alternating between fear of having done something wrong and relief of having finally acted. The next morning, I turned on the TV expecting to see some news, but nothing happened. Days passed and the silence continued. I began to wonder if my email had been ignored or if something else was happening. 2 weeks passed without any news. I continued doing my new route, but I couldn't get house 237 out of my head. On a Thursday afternoon, I was returning home when I noticed unusual activity on my old route. Police cars were parked in front of the mysterious house. My heart raced. I parked the car at a safe distance and observed. I saw police officers entering and leaving the house, carrying boxes and plastic bags. The couple was not in sight. I stayed there for almost an hour, trying to understand what was happening. Part of me wanted to go there and tell everything I knew, but fear kept me in the car. The next day, the news was in all the local papers. The police had searched House 237 after receiving an anonymous tip. They didn't find anything related to the missing teenager, but they discovered a document forgery and money laundering scheme. The couple had been arrested. The mysterious letters were part of a code for communication with other criminals. The strange smell, chemical products used in forgery. I was relieved to have helped uncover a crime, but at the same time intrigued. What about the missing teenager? And the photos I saw on the wall? I never got answers to these questions. To this day, years later, I still find myself thinking about those strange days. Life returned to normal, but that experience changed me forever. Whenever I deliver a letter, I can't help but wonder, what secrets might it be carrying? Sometimes when I'm doing my route, I still feel that shiver down my spine when I pass near Elm Street. House 237 now has new residents, a young family with 2 small children. Everything seems normal, but I can't help looking at that mailbox with a twinge of apprehension. The mystery of the missing teenager was never solved, and that haunts me. Last week, I delivered a letter to the new family, and for an instant, I swore I smelled that same strange scent from before. It was just for a second, so fast that I almost believed I had imagined it. Almost. Since then, I've been paying more attention to the mail I deliver, to the faces of people on the street, to parked cars. Maybe I'm getting paranoid, or maybe there are more secrets hidden in this town than we'll ever know. One thing is certain, I'll never look at my job the same way again. Each letter, each package, could be a piece of a much larger and darker puzzle than we can imagine. Second story, my name is Stephanie, and what I'm about to tell you changed my life completely. 3 months ago, I received a new route as a mail carrier in Detroit, and since then, my days have turned into an emotional roller coaster. The neighborhood I was assigned to was known for its high crime rate, a place most people avoided at all costs. At first, I admit I underestimated the stories I heard about the area. I thought they were just exaggerations, you know. But my first day on that route was enough to realize that reality surpassed any scary rumor I had heard before. I remember it like it was yesterday. I parked the mail van at the corner of Oak Street and Maple Avenue, and as soon as I stepped out of the vehicle, I felt the weight of dozens of eyes on me. It was as if I had invaded forbidden territory, and everyone who passed by stared at me with a mix of curiosity and distrust that gave me chills. As I walked down the cracked sidewalk, holding the mail like an improvised shield, I couldn't help but notice the abandoned and graffitied buildings around me. I had the strange feeling that those decaying structures were watching me. At the third house on the street, when I approached to leave some bills in the rusty mailbox, a huge dog jumped against the fence, barking fiercely. I jumped back, almost dropping the letters. My heart raced, and I felt my hands shake. That's when it hit me. This wouldn't be a regular route, and I'd need much more than just goodwill to survive here. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself, and continued on my way. With each step, I felt I was being watched not only by the residents, but by eyes hidden in the shadows of alleys and behind torn curtains. As I advanced down the street, I noticed a group of young men standing on the corner. They whispered among themselves and didn't take their eyes off me. My instinct screamed for me to turn around and run back to the van, but something inside me made me keep going. When I passed them, one of them said something I didn't understand, and the others laughed. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I maintained my professional posture and just nodded, continuing on my way. That's when I realized, here, each delivery wasn't just a task. It was a challenge to my courage and determination. In the weeks that followed, each day brought a new threat. Once, while delivering a package to an apparently abandoned house, I heard a strange noise coming from inside. My heart almost stopped when the door slowly opened, creaking. To my relief, it was just an old man who looked at me suspiciously before taking the package without saying a word. On another day, I saw two guys arguing heatedly near an alley. One of them pulled out something that looked like a gun, and I quickly hid behind a parked car, praying not to be seen. I stayed there, paralyzed with fear, for several minutes until they left. But not everything was scary. Gradually, I began to notice small gestures of kindness. An elderly lady always offered me a glass of water when I passed by. A group of children started greeting me enthusiastically every morning. Even some of the guys on the corner, who used to stare at me with hostility, started giving me a respectful nod. It was as if slowly I was being accepted into this world so different from mine. It was on a cloudy Wednesday that things really got strange. I was delivering letters on a particularly quiet street when I noticed something unusual. All the curtains in the houses were closed, and there was no one on the streets. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my footsteps and the occasional creaking of a gate in the wind. Suddenly, I smelled a strong, metallic scent in the air. My stomach turned when I realized it was blood. Following the odor, I reached a narrow alley between two abandoned buildings. That's when I saw it, a dark puddle slowly spreading across the cracked concrete floor, coming from behind a large trash can. My entire body froze. I knew I should turn around and run, but something stopped me. With my heart pounding in my chest, I took a hesitant step towards the trash can. That's when I heard a whisper, so low I almost thought it was my imagination. "Don't look." Chills ran down my spine, and my hair stood on end. I looked around frantically, but there was no one in sight. When I turned my eyes back to the alley, the pool of blood had completely disappeared, leaving no trace. I ran away from there, with the feeling that something or someone was watching me, a presence I couldn't see, but could feel following me until the end of my shift. In the days that followed that strange incident in the alley, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, or rather, what I thought had happened. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret. Every noise made me jump. I began to notice things that I hadn't before. Windows that closed abruptly when I passed by, conversations that ceased at my approach, furtive glances exchanged between residents. It was as if the whole neighborhood shared a dark secret, and I had unwittingly stumbled upon it. One afternoon, while delivering a letter, I saw a strange symbol drawn on the sidewalk with chalk. It looked like an eye inside a triangle. When I returned the next day, the drawing had disappeared, but I noticed the same symbol tattooed on the wrist of a man who quickly crossed my path. The tension reached its peak on a Friday afternoon. I was almost finishing my route when I noticed an unaddressed envelope among the correspondence. I didn't remember seeing it before, and there was no stamp or any postal mark. Just my name, Stephanie, written in an elegant, old-fashioned calligraphy. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside, there was only a piece of paper with a cryptic message. "What you saw doesn't exist. What you don't see is real. Be careful with your next step." I felt a chill down my spine and looked around, certain that I was being watched. That's when I noticed, across the street, a hooded figure staring at me intently. The next day, I woke up determined to find out what was going on. I decided to arrive at the neighborhood earlier than usual, before my regular route time. The streets were almost deserted, with only a few residents leaving for work. As I walked, I tried to act naturally, but my eyes examined every detail around me. That's when I noticed something strange. In several houses, there were small chalk marks on the thresholds of the doors, almost imperceptible if you weren't looking for them. Some were simple lines, others looked like rudimentary symbols. My heart raced. Were they codes? Signs of some kind? I was so absorbed in my observations that I almost didn't notice when a black car, with tinted windows, passed slowly by me. The vehicle stopped a few meters ahead, and I saw the driver's window open partially. I froze in place, not knowing whether to run or pretend I hadn't noticed anything. Before I could decide, the car suddenly took off, leaving behind only a cloud of smoke and the echo of tires screeching on the asphalt. I stood there, paralyzed for a few seconds, feeling cold sweat running down my back. Something was definitely wrong in this neighborhood, and I was in the middle of it, whether I wanted to be or not. That afternoon, while delivering the mail, I noticed that the residents seemed more agitated than usual. Small groups formed on the corners, whispering and quickly dispersing when I approached. In one of the houses, I heard a heated discussion through a half-open window. The words "delivery" and "tonight" stood out, making my stomach churn. Were they talking about drugs? Or something worse? I tried to stay calm and continue my work, but my mind wouldn't stop creating scary scenarios. It was already getting dark when I reached the last house on my route. It was an old building with peeling paint and windows covered with boards. I hesitated for a moment before approaching the rusty mailbox. That's when I heard a noise coming from the back of the house, as if something heavy had fallen. My instinct screamed for me to get out of there, but curiosity was stronger. Silently, I rounded the side of the house, my heart beating so hard I feared someone might hear it. When I reached the back, I saw a half-open door and a faint light coming from inside. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and froze. Through the crack in the door, I saw 3 men crouched around something on the floor. One of them was holding a flashlight, illuminating what appeared to be an open trapdoor. My heart almost stopped when one of them raised his head and looked directly in my direction. I threw myself backwards, hiding behind a dry bush. I heard footsteps approaching and held my breath, praying not to be discovered. The door creaked, opening a little more, and a man's hoarse voice cut through the silence. Must have been just the wind. "Come on, we have to finish this before someone shows up." With trembling legs, I waited for a few minutes that seemed like an eternity before crawling back to the front of the house. I ran as quietly as I could to my van, got in, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so much I could barely turn the key in the ignition. As I drove away from that neighborhood, my mind was spinning. What had I just witnessed? Should I tell someone? What if those men recognized me? The questions piled up, but I had no answers. I only knew one thing. My life as a simple mail carrier in Detroit would never be the same again. In the days that followed, I lived in a constant state of alert. Every sound, every sudden movement made me jump. I thought about asking for a transfer, about reporting what I saw to the police, but something told me that would only make things worse. So, I continued my route, pretending nothing had happened. But I couldn't deny that something had changed. The residents' look seemed more intense, as if they knew I knew too much. The black car reappeared a few times, always keeping its distance, but its presence was undeniable. A week after the incident at the abandoned house, I found another envelope without a return address among my correspondence. This time, it contained only a piece of paper with one word: silence. I understood the message. They knew I had seen something, and they were warning me to keep quiet. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell someone to do something. But another part, the one that was learning to survive in this neighborhood, knew that the best thing to do was exactly what the note said: stay silent. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Gradually, the tension decreased. The black car stopped appearing. The suspicious looks became less frequent. But I never forgot what I saw that night. Sometimes when I passed by the abandoned house, I still feel a shiver run down my spine. The neighborhood keeps its secrets, and now I'm part of them. I continue delivering letters, greeting residents, living my seemingly normal life. But I know that beneath the surface of this community, there's a world that few know about. A world of which I had only a glimpse, and that changed my life forever. Today, when I look back at that Stephanie who arrived scared in this neighborhood months ago, I barely recognize her. The fear still exists, of course, but now it's accompanied by a strange sense of belonging. I've learned to read the silent signs of this community, to understand its unspoken codes. And although part of me still wants to discover the truth behind that mysterious night, another part understands that some secrets are best kept. After all, in this neighborhood, silence isn't just a choice, it's a form of survival. Third story. I still shudder remembering what happened to me last week. It was one of those days when you wake up feeling an odd energy in the air, as if something was about to go wrong. I've been a mailman for over 20 years here in Colorado, and I've been through some tough situations, but nothing compares to what I experienced that day. This winter has been brutal, the worst we've faced in decades. The temperature was hovering around 22°F, with a wind that cut to the bone. Even so, we have to work, right? The letters and packages don't deliver themselves. I left home while it was still dark, around a.m. I could barely see a foot in front of me because of the heavy snowfall. It was almost a.m. when I reached the most isolated part of my route. The houses there are far apart, and some days I don't see a soul for hours. That day, the sense of isolation was even greater because of the blizzard. The wind howled, shaking the van from side to side, and I had to struggle to keep the vehicle on the road. That's when I noticed something strange. Mr. Thompson's mailbox, an old man who lives alone in a secluded house, was crammed with letters and newspapers. Usually, Mr. Thompson is very punctual in collecting his mail. I felt uneasy. I decided to stop and check, just to make sure everything was okay. I didn't think twice. I turned the doorknob and, to my surprise, the door opened. The house interior was freezing, almost as cold as outside. "Mr. Thompson?" I called again, my voice echoing through the dark room. Another moan, weaker this time. I followed the sound to the bedroom, and what I saw shocked me. Mr. Thompson was lying on the floor, wrapped in blankets, shaking violently. His lips were blue, and he could barely keep his eyes open. I ran to him, my heart racing. "Mr. Thompson, can you hear me?" I asked, holding his ice-cold hand. He mumbled something unintelligible. I realized the situation was critical. With trembling hands, not from cold, but from nervousness, I began to act on instinct. First, I needed to warm Mr. Thompson somehow. I searched the house for more blankets, found some in a closet, and covered him as much as I could. Then I remembered I had a small portable stove in the van, the kind I used to heat coffee on long deliveries. I lit the stove near the bed, careful not to cause any accidents. The heat was minimal, but better than nothing. I looked at Mr. Thompson's pale face, praying it would make a difference. Minutes passed like hours. I alternated between rubbing his hands and feet, trying to make him drink some warm water I managed to prepare, and checking if he was still breathing. I don't know how much time passed, but gradually I noticed a small change. Mr. Thompson's breathing seemed to become more regular, and his skin wasn't as cold to the touch. I felt a glimmer of hope. I kept talking to him, even without knowing if he could hear me, telling stories about my deliveries, anything to keep him connected. Mr. Thompson needed medical care, and I knew I couldn't leave him alone. I looked out the window and saw that the blizzard had subsided a bit. It was now or never. I made a risky decision. I would take him with me in the van to the nearest hospital. Carefully, I wrapped him in all the blankets I could find and, in a mix of adrenaline and desperation, managed to carry him to the vehicle. The journey to the hospital was a real nightmare. The roads were covered in ice and snow, and I could barely see what was in front of me. I drove with a caution I'd never had before, aware that any mistake could be fatal. Every now and then, I glanced at Mr. Thompson beside me, making sure he was still breathing. The silence in the van was broken only by the sound of the engine and my passenger's occasional low moan. After what seemed like a lifetime, I finally saw the hospital lights. I've never felt such relief as I did at that moment. I parked haphazardly in front of the emergency room and got out shouting for help. The nurses came running with a stretcher, and within seconds, Mr. Thompson was being taken inside. I stood there in the middle of the snow, shaking not just from cold, but from sheer emotional exhaustion. The following hours were a blur. I stayed at the hospital, waiting for news, unable to leave without knowing if Mr. Thompson would be okay. I called my supervisor, explained the situation, and to my surprise, he was understanding. He said I had done the right thing and not to worry about work at that moment. I sat there in the waiting room, reliving every moment of that crazy day in my head. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a doctor came to talk to me. He said Mr. Thompson was stable, that I had arrived just in time, and that my actions had probably saved his life. I felt my legs weaken and had to sit down. The relief was so great that I started crying right there, in front of everyone. I didn't care. All the tension, fear, and adrenaline of the last few hours finally hit me at once. In the days that followed, I returned to my normal delivery routine, but something had changed. Every time I passed Mr. Thompson's house, I remembered that day. He recovered completely and always makes a point of thanking me when he sees me. The townspeople found out about the incident and started treating me like a local hero, something I never felt comfortable accepting. After all, I just did what anyone would have done, right? This experience taught me a lot about the value of life, about how small actions can make a big difference. Today, I pay more attention to details, to small changes in the houses I pass by. You never know when we might be someone's only hope. The Colorado winter remains as harsh as ever, but now I carry with me not just letters and packages, but also the awareness that each delivery may be more important than we imagine.